Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Cho Devlin, and I feel privileged and proud to be Head of School for the Melbourne Veterinary School in the Faculty of Science. Our Dean of Science, Professor Moira O'Brien, is in India this week as part of the university's delegation, so I'm delighted that she asked me to welcome you on her behalf to this Science at Melbourne public lecture. I will begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we are on this evening, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people. I also acknowledge the traditional owners and First Nations people of the lands from which our online audience is joining tonight. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are Australia's first scientists with deep and enduring knowledge of the lands, waters, skies, and of particular relevance this evening, our precious native animals. I pay my respect to elders past and present, and I welcome all First Nations people here this evening. It is my pleasure to introduce the last of 4 events in the Science at Melbourne lecture series for 2025. This series is just one way that the Faculty of Science shares our knowledge and love of science with the wider community. We aim to demonstrate the breadth, depth, and impact of our research and to involve you in our conversations about some of the most pressing scientific and social issues of our time. I will quickly go through some housekeeping details so we can focus on the main discussion. We are recording this lecture and will make this recording available on the Faculty of Science website. We will email the link to everyone who registered. If you haven't already, I encourage you to sign up to our mailing list to learn about more upcoming opportunities to engage with our research. I also encourage everyone attending in person this evening to enjoy refreshments and some informal chat with the speakers and other attendees after the lecture. Tonight's discussion is titled Animals and Us, the Role of Nature in Society. Animals have played a central role in my career as a practicing veterinarian and as a veterinary scientist. Today, my research focuses on controlling diseases of domestic animals and wildlife, including birds, horses, and marsupials. Animals are central to ecosystems and food systems on which animal societies depend. When they thrive, we thrive. Animals also enrich our lives with companionship and inspiration. Our relationship with animals raises some tough questions. How do we balance the conservation of animal species with human needs? What are the economic, social, and environmental costs of animal agriculture, and how should we mitigate them? What ethical responsibilities do we owe the creatures that we depend on? I can't wait to hear our panellists' insights and ideas. Our moderator will introduce these experts in greater detail shortly, so instead I will focus on introducing her. Based in the University of Melbourne School of Agriculture, Food and Ecosystem Sciences, Dr Kylie Soanes is a conservation biologist focused on saving nature in cities and towns. Whether by collaborating with city councils to plan wildlife corridors, building rope bridges to help endangered possums cross busy highways, or working with architects to create designer homes for owls, Kylie is always seeking new ways to help nature thrive in urban environments. She previously led the Shared Urban Habitat Project through the National Environmental Science Program, working with industry and government to develop a strong evidence base for urban conservation. A skilled science communicator, Kylie shares her passion for nature conservation with broader audiences through the media, including The Conservation, The Guardian, and ABC Radio National, public presentations, and her research blog. Clearly, we are in very safe hands, so anticipating a fascinating and important discussion, I'll happily pass the lead to Kylie.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jo. We are here to talk about animals and us. And as a little introduction, I spent most of last week waxing lyrical to people about the wonders and joys of having nature in the city. And I was thrilled when I got home from a really long day of interviews and engagement when my husband said, "Come out the front, the magpies have just had their chicks fledge." And sure enough, out the front, our local magpie family had their brand new fluffy chick waddling up and down the street. And it was just a really wonderful moment. And then hours later, I was sobbing as I laid that baby magpie to rest because, unfortunately, our relationship with nature in the city is very complicated. And all of that great joy opens us up to moments of really intense sorrow. So our relationship with animals is powerful, and it is important, and it is complicated. And we have an intense responsibility to care and act and manage that relationship. And that's what we're going to explore tonight with this wonderful panel, who I'm going to introduce to you now. First of all, Dr. Marissa Parrott. Dr. Marissa Parrott is a senior conservation biologist at Zoos Victoria and an honorary research associate at the University of Melbourne. Marissa works across Melbourne Zoo, Hillsville Sanctuary, Werribee Open Range Zoo, Kyabram Fauna Park, and numerous Australian and international field locations to improve captive breeding and reintroduction success and lead conservation and emergency response actions for some of the world's most endangered species. Welcome, Marissa. We also have Dr. Cam Raw. Dr. Cam is a Palawa man from southern Lutruwita in Tasmania, a senior lecturer in Indigenous engagement and clinical teaching in Melbourne Veterinary School, and Assistant Dean for Indigenous for Education at the Faculty of Science. The focus of his clinical research and career has been working with remote Indigenous communities in accessible veterinary care and One Health programs to improve the health of animals as well as the people that they share their lives with. Please welcome Cam. And finally, Dr. Peta Taylor. Peta Taylor is an animal science lecturer in the School of Agriculture, Food and Ecosystem Sciences at the University of Melbourne and an animal welfare scientist with the Animal Welfare Science Centre in the Faculty of Science. Her research focuses on the behaviour and welfare of commercial poultry, with a particular interest in how individuals interact with their environment and the impact that this has on their welfare. Peta holds a PhD in animal science and is completing her Master of Science in Neuroscience from the University of New England. And she finds real-world solutions to improve the welfare of meat chickens, laying eggs and breeders with environmental enrichment, positive welfare assessment and understanding abnormal behaviours. Please welcome Peta. But what I'd really like to do as we start the evening is give each of our panellists an opportunity to tell us who they are as people and what motivates them to be the kinds of scientists that specialise in understanding and improving our relationship with animals. So first up, I'm going to throw to Cam. Cam, please tell us your story.
Thank you very much. I'll start with getting a show of hands. Who has animals, pets at home? Can you keep your hand up if it takes you more than 5 minutes to get to the nearest vet if your pet needs care? Keep them up if it takes more than 10 minutes. 15, 20, 30 minutes? No one longer than that? Okay. So being an Aboriginal man, I knew that I wanted to connect whatever I did in my career with Indigenous populations and to serve communities. And so I knew that I wanted to connect my vet career, which is what I always wanted to do, with that sort of work. And so the work that I'm involved in now is around serving remote Indigenous communities, many of whom are more than 5 hours drive from the nearest vet clinic. And for many people on island communities, it's a charter plane. And so part of what we can do as vets and academics at the university is help to deliver animal health programs to people working in those communities, and also to conduct some research to see how we can do that best, and also how we can influence the health of people through treating their animals. And so an example of that is, and what I researched in my PhD, was around parasites that we know infect both animals and people, and that if we're just treating the people, we're probably neglecting the same infections in animals, and that they can pass those infections on to people. So how can we have that big effect on both animals and people? And that's the One Health area, thinking about animals, people, and the environment as one big interconnected thing, which it is, and which is a way that Indigenous people have been thinking about interconnectedness for tens of thousands of years.
Beautiful. Thank you, Cam. Marissa, what drives you?
I have always loved animals and wildlife, not just the animals in my life, but those out in wild places. And when I was about 3 years old, I told my parents that I wanted to work in zoos and make baby animals. And as I got older, that became, I want to work in conservation breeding programs and really make a difference. So I studied genetics and reproduction, wildlife ecology and biology, all sorts of different things to get me to where I wanted to be. And then here at Melbourne Uni, I did a PhD and postdoc working with small carnivorous marsupials, Antechinus and Dunarts, to do mate choice research and see why females chose particular males and how that might influence breeding success, and how I could use those natural behaviours to improve breeding success in captive breeding programs. And that's something I've been focusing on for a long time, working with those animals all the way up to the world's largest extant carnivorous marsupial, the beautiful Tasmanian devil. I've worked with their conservation for about 17 years now. And I work with a lot of other species too. So I've been with Zoos Victoria for 18 years, working with marsupials and rodents, frogs, reptiles, birds, and even invertebrates. And an amazing group of people who really want to make that difference too. So Zoos Victoria is a not-for-profit zoo-based conservation organisation, and our main driving focus is to fight extinction. We have a commitment that I'm really proud of, which is that no Victorian terrestrial vertebrate will ever go extinct on our watch. Victorians, because they're the species in our own backyards, and terrestrial vertebrates, so birds, mammals, reptiles, frogs, and increasingly invertebrates, because they're the ones where we have the most expertise. And so we have a list of 27 priority or fighting extinction species that we really focus on, both with our captive programs and out in the wild, so that we can do the best for them and also other species. And we have international programs. We work with about 300 different conservation partners so that we can focus on what happens out in the wild. For us, the metrics of success is having animals safe back out in the wild where they belong. And so that's what really drives me, protecting those species and giving them the best life and getting them back out in the wild so one day they won't need us anymore.
More baby animals.
More
Sounds
baby
good.
animals.
Peta, same to you.
I guess hearing that, I've got a confession to make. I didn't grow up wanting to be a chicken scientist. But I knew that I wanted to help improve the lives of farm animals. And so when I finished my bachelor, I, of course, wanted to do a PhD at the Animal Welfare Science Centre because I had seen how their science was implemented in policy and changing animal welfare. And so I knocked on the door and I said, please give me a PhD. And they said, sure. And I thought, great, I'm going to work on like very cute bobby calves or adorable lambs. And they said, you can work on chickens. And I was quite disappointed, I'm sorry to say. And actually, I felt like I wasn't even given the good chicken. So stay with me here. These, if you're unaware, there's a couple of commercial chickens that we use in Australia and globally. The one on the left is a laying hen, selected for egg production, so over 300 eggs per year. And the one on, your left is the white one, is a meat chicken, selected for growth and meat production. They're the same age here. This is a photo I took at an experiment we did a few years ago. And yeah, so no added hormones. I just want to get rid of that misconception first with the meat chicken, but genetically selecting for growth. And so now these birds reach about 2.2 kilos by 35 days of age on 1/3 of the feed. So extraordinary genetics. And so, so I thought I've got this bad chicken, and I rolled my sleeves up and I read and I learned and I discovered how amazing chickens are. They have over 30 vocalizations. Mothers are beautiful. They talk to their developing chicks in the egg and they talk back. They can do basic math 5 days after hatching. They are incredible animals. But I think why, there's post-chicken Peta and then there's, pre-chicken Peta. But why this experience was so important to me and drives what I do is I started treating this chicken like an adult, but it's a baby. It's 42 days old in an adult's body. And so I think as a scientist, that was so powerful about what my preconceived ideas about what this animal was and what it needs really needed to be challenged. And that's when I used the science and used the tools that we have to ask and listen to the animal and understand its subjective experience.
Yeah, wow. How to fall in love with the bad chicken. Now you all know.
Titled my memoir.
That is actually very good. You should do that. So one of the core themes that we're thinking about is how animals enrich our lives. And, I told the terrible story of the loss of our baby magpies on our street, but I still wouldn't exchange that relationship that we have with a local animal, that joy that it brings to have, a magpie warbling in the front of your yard, to know that it's going to come down and forage the weevils and earwigs and whatever else it can find in your garden. Like the sheer pure delight of having a relationship like that with a wild animal in your environment. It's not something that I would switch out. And so that's made me curious for each of you. Is there an animal relationship that has enriched your lives, or an encounter that really sticks out for you that you're happy to share today? Cam, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I have been surrounded by animals since the day I was born. We've always had animals in my house, and it's hard to choose one, but since I was forced, this is Jake. Jake came to us because he fell off the back of a truck on a highway in Tasmania, and he was taken into the local vet. He had a broken leg as a result of falling off the back of the truck, and there was a pretty concerted effort to find wherever he came from, but it was a pretty major highway, and unfortunately no one ever found where he came from. He was still a very young puppy at that stage. And he actually went into my uncle's vet clinic, and my uncle happened to know that we were looking for a dog at that time. So Jake came to our house as a means of just looking after him until the owner was found. And luckily enough for us, they never came forward. So Jake and I grew up together, and he taught me so much about learning to be around animals, and as did my family, having grown up with them since I was so young. And like with many animals, he had his own health struggles throughout his life. He had a bit of arthritis, particularly in that leg that was broken. And so there were multiple visits to the vet throughout his life. And for me, that really emphasised for me that I wanted a career in caring not just for animals, but influencing the lives of the people that they share their lives with too, knowing how much he meant to me and how much he improved my life, what that influence can be for a vet in terms of the broader influence. We often, as vets, think that we're just treating an animal. And I think for many vets, when COVID came along and it was essentially putting the animal through the dog door and the owner stayed outside, a lot of vets were thinking, this is great, we're just having to deal with the animal and not the person that's attached. But then those same people suddenly came to realise, actually, we deal with people, and that's really important too. And so those two pieces of the puzzle, I think, are inseparable. And so I think Jake, just for me, is really important for what he taught me about myself and about our connection with animals.
It's all interconnected. Marissa.
I've got both a species and an individual within that. And for me, I have always loved the critically endangered mountain pygmy possum. I've had a picture of them on my wall since I was 12. And when I'd finished my PhD, I was so thrilled to be invited to the mountain pygmy possum recovery team to advise on mate choice and breeding success. And there I met the team from Hillsville Sanctuary who offered me a job. So it's because of the possums that I work at Zoos Victoria, and I've now worked with them in our conservation breeding program in the wild with reintroductions and monitoring, even developing nutritionally suitable, shelf-stable emergency food for use after things like the Black Summer fires. But there's one little possum that always stands out for me, and his name was Jerry. Jerry the geriatric. In the wild, with all the threats and predators, females often only live 3 or 4 years, males often only 1 year. Well, Jerry was 9. And at Hillsville, we encourage and maintain natural behaviours like hibernation and food caching or food storage, which they do out in the wild. So we have temperature-controlled alpine mimicking enclosures. And Jerry was really good at stashing his nuts in his nest with him. But when you've got a warm little body sleeping in there, sometimes his nuts weren't as fresh as they could be. So I would go in and take out the nuts and replace them with fresh ones. And he thought he had the best system ever, until one day he caught me. And I was taking out his walnut, and he woke up, and the look of betrayal on his face, he put his little paws up, my nut. And I felt so bad. So I went and I got him the juiciest, freshest, nicest walnut you will ever meet. And I gave it back to him. And when I checked on him later that day before I went home for the day, there was little Jerry curled up in a ball, cuddling his walnut like a teddy bear. And so that really stays with me, Jerry and his beautiful walnut. And it's one of the things I love about working in zoos, that yes, we are focused on recovering and protecting whole populations and whole species, but you also get to know the individuals, like I got to know Jerry, and he will always be in my heart, little Jerry.
I think Jerry's in everyone's heart now. Peta.
Geez, that's a beautiful story to follow. Thank you. Chickens, of course. I want to talk about this. Actually, I've got a video to show you. This is amazing Dr. Sam Chu, and on the left, the hands coming through, is Dr. Megan Lucas, who's a wonderful animal welfare scientist here at Melbourne Uni. And she runs this chicken training prac with our students and trains them to do tricks. You can see here, pink is the correct target. If she pecks it, she gets a treat, a little click to say yes, correct behaviour, and a little mealworm treat. Probably just like you've trained your dog to go to the bathroom or roll over, and here she goes past all the others and knows. And it's so cute. And this prac runs every year, but actually was from a paper by Susan Hazel at the University of Adelaide. And she had started using this prac, just like Megan, to teach students about animal behaviour and animal learning. But Susan surveyed the attitudes of her students before they trained the chickens and afterwards. And the students, the first year veterinary students, afterwards liked chickens more. So hooray, that's great. They also said things like, chickens are way smarter than I first thought. And that's awesome. But also, what was quite shocking to me is that they ranked the chicken's ability to feel higher. Yeah. So a smarter chicken was more likely to feel frustration or pain or hunger. And to me, that was concerning, because why should feelings have anything to do with intelligence? And we actually know that that's not quite true. Sentience is different than tool use. Yeah. Maybe different needs, but feeling, talking from pain and suffering to pleasure, these sorts of things were highlighted beautifully in this prac. And I think, again, it was this idea of we have this idea of what animals are and what animals matter. And so from this experience, I mean, it's great fun. If you have backyard chickens, go and click a training. It's awesome. But also, I realise that we need to do the science and then we need to talk about it. We need to talk about the capacity of these animals and the evidence behind it, because as we get better at being scientists, we get better at asking the questions. And we're finding evidence of sentience in all sorts of animals, chickens, fish, insects. And I think that that's really important, that we understand the animals and then we can have those discussions about what that means for our duty of care.
That is, I think if we ran that survey here, there's a lot of people that would probably change their mind about chickens now. I had exactly the same thought as your students. I'm like, chickens are way smarter than I thought. But that's a really good segue into the next topic that we want to explore, which is that complexity, right? The more you dig into it, the more our relationship with animals is not straightforward and cut and dry as we might think it is. So I'm going to start with Cam as an example. When it comes to our domestic animals and our pets, there can be a delicate interplay between what they might prefer, what their free will would be, and what's best for them. Are they free roaming? Do they get neutered? I think a lot of pets might prefer not to be. And what we think is best for their health and welfare. So what are your thoughts on the conflict that might arise between our deep love and care for our domestic animals and how to manage what's actually best for their health and that responsibility?
Excellent question. So it's something that I think a lot about in the work that I do, and particularly the contrasts between the animals that I may see in a clinic down here in Melbourne versus the animals that we see up in remote communities in the Northern Territory. And so we have a beautiful photo here of a dog called Spotty, who lives in a very remote island community in Arnhem Land. And so thinking about dogs in these places requires us to think about people's history interacting with animals. And for Aboriginal people, that is a very, very long history. Having been on this continent for 65,000 plus years, people have interacted with animals, formed connections with animals in many, many different ways, but dogs have only been here a couple of 100 years. And so thinking back, Indigenous people's connection with canines has extended further back than that because there were dingoes here for about 4,000 years, which amongst 65,000 years is not that much, but it's still pretty huge compared to the last 200 years. And so historically, Indigenous people would bring a dingo pup into the community. The dingo pup would hang around. As it grew up, it would become a hunting partner with people. They could be trained to herd animals in closer to the community for hunting, and they would be a hunting partner. They would share in the spoils of the hunt. But once they reached maturity, they would often go back to a wild existence. And so there was that balance between animals in the community and animals in the wild. Then, with colonisation, once dogs entered the picture, things shifted quite a bit. Because part of what makes domestic dogs is us, is their connection with us. They have developed and evolved with us, and they want to be around us. And so these dogs in remote communities want to stick around, and there are also some quite important biological differences, aside from the fact that they hang around and they don't tend to go into a wild existence quite so much. They breed much more often. They can breed about twice a year, and they can have much larger litters compared to dingoes. So dingoes will have maybe 1 litter a year of maybe 4 pups. And so that brings a lot of balance and sustainability to the dingo population in the wild that then we don't see when there are dogs in community, and particularly if they're free roaming, as dogs tend to be in remote Indigenous communities. And so that's a big difference that we see between Melbourne and up there. We see free roaming dogs in remote communities. Because they're free roaming, they're interacting with each other a lot, they're interacting with a lot of different people. And so through that, they're developing some really complex behaviour. They're getting used to being around each other. They work out their squabbles. Whereas down here, we might see dogs who live in an apartment and don't get out very much, and they can be quite anxious. And that can feel like we're protecting animals, and I'm not making any judgments on what is best here, but there are definite things that we can see that are quite different between those two settings. But it's a trade-off too, because these free-roaming dogs, they are much more likely to be hit by a car if they're free-roaming. We know that in Melbourne here, where we're keeping dogs potentially fenced in or in an apartment, we're actually in the minority globally. Globally, about 75% of dogs are free-roaming, and a lot of those dogs are in areas where they might be exposed to things like rabies as well. We see a lot more transmission of diseases in free-roaming dogs. And so in those free-roaming areas, being desexed can be quite an advantage because they're not continually breeding, they're not under the big metabolic strain of being, particularly for the females, being pregnant regularly. And so there are a lot of benefits there. But there are risks as well, and we see some things like transmissible venereal tumours, which is a lot like the Tassie devil facial tumour. We see that quite a bit in remote communities in the Northern Territory. So it's very hard to say what dogs want. I'm not a welfare scientist, so I don't have the data to back up what they want based on the measurements that we can take. But what I can say is around the health benefits that we can see from being free roaming through their behaviour. You can see there on Spotty, she's got beautiful teeth because she's often gnawing on bones, but I don't recommend that to my patients down here in Melbourne because that can lead to health problems by chewing on bones. So it's often a trade-off, and but they want to be around us. That's the key thing. These dogs they've evolved to be around people and to have that connection.
Marissa, I think only a zoo conservation scientist would nod vigorously when they heard venereal tumours.
Devils.
But my question to you for zoos is, it's no secret that zoos have a bit of a checkered history when it comes to the relationship with animals. Can you speak more to the change in philosophy and the change in approaches and the role of zoos in society today?
Absolutely. And zoos have been around for thousands of years, and they really started out as areas with small enclosures that were all about entertainment and curiosity. And then there have been big changes, particularly over the last few hundred years, and then particularly again over the last few decades, moving into areas where zoos are more about education and science and animal welfare. And then more recently, where zoos are about conservation and about protecting and recovering species. So globally, zoos and aquariums are the third largest investors in direct conservation actions for wildlife. And we see about 700 million people every year come through zoos, which means not only can we work directly with animals, but we can work with people around better behaviours and about how to protect and care for wildlife in your own backyards as well. There are a number of species that now would be extinct if not for zoos. Internationally, species like the Arabian oryx and the black-footed ferrets are famous examples, and more locally, animals like the mainland eastern-barred bandicoot and the helmeted honeyeater. We have insurance programs for animals found nowhere else, like the critically endangered bawbaw frog or the Victorian grassland earless dragon. So there's some really amazing work that we're able to do that I think no one else can. And I think it would surprise people the different types of expertise we have in zoos. So at Zoos Victoria, for example, we of course have animal husbandry specialists and veterinarians, horticulturalists and ground staff and visitor experience. But in my team, the Wildlife Conservation and Science team, we have about 30 conservation and ecology specialists working in the zoos and out in the wild. But also we have another 30 or so community conservation and social scientists. We have animal welfare specialists and educators. We have wildlife welfare specialists, veterinarians who go out and work in the wild with wildlife, particularly after emergencies like floods and fires. We have sustainability managers and even a conservation detection dog squad helping us find endangered species and monitor estrus and lactation cycles in devils. So with all of those different skill sets, we can really make a huge difference for wildlife and for people. But it's not just the big zoos that are able to do that kind of work. We have a sister zoo, Port Moresby Nature Park in Papua New Guinea, and they do the most amazing community and education and conservation work there. So I would say if you want to learn more, go to the websites for Papua New Guinea, for Zoos Victoria, or better yet, come and visit us and actually see the kind of work that happens at zoos, because you'd be surprised just how much is done there and how we can help species like the ones on the screen.
No one can say no to a visit to the zoo, I don't think. Peta, many would argue that maybe the well-being of farm animals is best achieved by not eating them. So could you talk more to that and, you know, the difference between animal ethics, health and welfare?
So I get the easy question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kylie.
Yeah, you get the fun chickens chasing the pink dots.
Yes. It's an important question, and it's a very interesting one, and I would argue it's primarily an ethical question.
Yeah.
And I am not an ethicist,
Yep.
so I can't answer that. Really, when we're talking about ethics, we're talking about what we should do. We're talking about morality, right? What's right and what's wrong. We know in society that things are shifting in terms of what's right and what's wrong with how we interact with animals. That's related but different to animal welfare. Animal welfare is not something we give an animal. It's not something that we ought to do to an animal. It is the state of that animal. And the World Organization for Animal Health defines animal welfare as not just the physical state, as Cam was saying, which is health, but we're also talking about the mental state of that animal as well. And it's how its physical and mental state is in the environment in which it lives and in which it dies. And so I think it is important to understand that good health is part, but not all, of animal welfare. And also, I mean, we could sit and debate and discuss that definition for a long time, but the other point I wanted to make there is that animal welfare is not just about the absence of suffering. It's also about positive experiences and like pleasure and those things we were talking about before. So animal ethics and animal welfare are different, but I argue as an animal welfare scientist that that knowledge about animal welfare and how we can assess that really should be informing our decisions, our ethical decisions about our interactions with animals. And it doesn't always dictate it because the world is complex and we have to think about human welfare and environmental impacts and all these sorts of things. But if we are not making ethical decisions about animals without at least considering the impact on their welfare, then I think we are making unsustainable decisions about our interactions with animals.
Beautiful.
So I'm not going to tell you whether we should eat them or not. But if we are going to, and there's over 80 billion terrestrial animals alone a year are raised and slaughtered for food production. As an animal welfare scientist, if that is going to happen, I want to understand the animal's experience and how we can improve it.
Thank you. Moving on from the fact that it can be murky and complex, we're going to start to think now about this idea of care not just being a passion or a feeling or an emotion, but an action. How do we express our care and our love and our endearment of animals as an action, and what does that look like? So I'm going to invite each of our panellists now to share an example of a project or an initiative that they've been involved in that really demonstrates how we have the power to take action to care for and improve animals' lives. Cam, we're going to start with you.
Yes, so I've already alluded to the project that I'm involved in. It's called the West Arnhem Land Dog Health Program, which is a bit of a mouthful. We just call it WALDHEP. This is something that I came to be involved in my final year of vet school. It was a program started by Professor Liz Tudor. And this is a program that she started because she saw a need for that provision of care in remote Indigenous communities. And so I've been involved in it for about 12 years now. It's something that is really dear to my heart, and it's the crucial part of it is we're not just picking up what we do in Melbourne and plonking it in remote communities in Arnhem Land. It's about doing something that is culturally responsive. So recognising that the connection that people have in these places can be quite different to the connection that people have in Melbourne or in other metropolitan areas. So coming into it with a lot of humility, recognising that we don't have all the answers, we don't know everything about how people interact with animals, providing care where we can, recognising that access to healthcare, whether it be for people or for animals, can be really challenging in these remote places. So the kinds of things that we're doing from a vet perspective are really quite simple. We're doing things like desexing surgeries. We're working in really remote places. So you can see there on the right, this is in a remote outstation in Western Arnhem Land. We take all the gear with us. So that's a lot of equipment to be able to do a desexing surgery on an animal outside. But we're also providing things like parasite treatments, which, as I alluded to at the start, can have big knock-on effects if you're removing parasites from a dog that may have spread onto people. So we can have really quite profound effects in the health of the animals, but also their owners and the other people that they share their lives with. Another really key part of what we do there is we take final year vet students with us. So these vet students are in the final year of their training. They're just about to go out into the workforce as vets, and they choose to invest their time with us and come out to these remote communities, and they have a wonderful time, and they get the opportunity to learn about culture, to be immersed in culture in these places. And they just get so much out of it. I did it when I was a final year vet student, and Liz hasn't been able to get rid of me since then. And there's a reason that I keep going back, because it's just a wonderful place. I feel like I am serving community. I feel like I'm learning more about different cultures, different to my own Aboriginal culture up there. And it's one of the things that I'm most passionate about.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cam. We'll throw now to Marissa.
Excellent. One of the species that I've worked with for a long time is one that was cared for by, and still is, by a cast of absolutely thousands, staff from zoos and NGOs and government and community groups and volunteers, and it's the mainland eastern barred bandicoot. A beautiful, amazing species, important in its ecosystem, and it was actually listed as extinct in the wild on mainland Australia. And so for more than 3 decades now, people have worked to protect and recover the little eastern barred bandicoot. All of the mainland eastern barred bandicoots can be traced back to our breeding program that started in the late 1980s at Melbourne Zoo, working with the Eastern Barred Bandicoot Recovery Team, which we've been working with since then. And over 3 decades or 33 years, we bred more than 1,200. We released about 750 out to live at wild type sites. And there was amazing work by partners like Parks Victoria and Odonata and others who then had bandicoots behind fox-free fences because they have issues with habitat destruction and cats, but their big issue is foxes. And so we were able to build up their numbers in these safe predator-free areas. And then about 10 years ago, we started working as well with Phillip Island Nature Parks and the French Island community, releasing bandicoots out to islands and being cared for again by communities out there at Churchill Island, then Phillip Island, then French Island. And then something amazing happened with all of those bandicoots starting to increase on 3 islands and behind 4 fences. The recovery team, we were able to reclassify the bandicoots from extinct in the wild back to endangered, which was an Australian first. And after 33 years of our captive breeding program, we were able to shut it down because we were no longer needed. And for a species listed as extinct in the wild, to close down a breeding program because it was successful was a world first. Thank you. It was such a special moment for us. And this picture that you're looking at was a really special moment, maybe my favourite from my entire career because I led the captive breeding program for the eastern barred bandicoot for about its last decade. And, you know, right to its wind down, I was privileged to release the last ever bandicoot from our program back out to live as wild at Woodlands Historic Park. And so that's that photo, the last ever bandicoot being released. And the work doesn't stop there. We're still working hard across all of those sites with our partners. If you take your foot off the accelerator, they could go back. And so there's a lot of work still happening for the bandicoots. But I think it's a real story of hope, and it shows that when you have that care from that cast of thousands of people and that long-term focus and partnerships and investment, that you can fight extinction, you can save species, and the beautiful little bandicoots are a great example of that.
That is an excellent example of it. I can't believe that tops Jerry and his walnut, though.
Maybe they're on par.
Peta.
Damn you.
They told me this order was useful for the slides. I'm sorry.
My active care for many animals, but I'm going to talk about chickens, of course, looks very different in different contexts, different days, even in the same animals. And so I wanted to share a couple of examples about what care through our research looks like. So I'm going to start with the hard parts about really caring for animals and trying to minimise suffering. And so we're working currently on a project with the laying hen industry. Australia has shifted to now ban conventional cage housing for laying hens. And what we're now seeing is in commercial egg production, these flocks of birds doing some very strange behaviours. And so there's this maladaptive behaviour or abnormal behaviour where chickens will pile and they're not frightened, they just press up against each other like a chicken mosh pit, and it can happen from minutes to hours. And it happens multiple times a day. We don't know why they do it, but hundreds of chickens can suffocate and die from those events. And so we're working to understand what is causing this behaviour and how can we stop it. With the meat chickens that I showed before, that genetic selection for rapid growth has resulted in some issues for the parents of those chickens. And people don't really think about chicken parents. And in fact, a lot of our welfare quality assurance programs don't include the parents of those chickens. And so because we know it's not added hormones, it is genetic selection, those genes are passed from their parents. And if they were to grow and consume feed as their progeny do, they would become obese and they would become lame and they would have health issues, they would stop reproducing and they would die. And so globally, the solution at the moment is to restrict the feed that they're provided. And in fact, because of this rapid growth, it can be as little as 25% of what they actually want to eat. And so it's kind of an issue. If you don't restrict the feed, there's a welfare issue. If you do, there's a welfare issue of chronic stress and hunger. And so we're working with nutritionists and the chicken meat industry to try and develop diets that have the same calories but will swell and send the signals to the brain to say I'm full. But as well as that, give them things in their environment, meaningful interactions to help build stress resilience and create different experiences in their life. And so that's a bit of a downer, and especially after that story, but it shows that sometimes caring can actually be the harder parts, the complexities that you were talking about. But I'll just go back to that picture as well. There are things that we also do with our research. This isn't just about avoiding suffering. I'm really interested in enrichment. What can we give to animals to enrich their lives and give them positive experiences? And not what we think is enriching, what they find enriching. And here's one example, and it's windows. So we just gave chickens, this is on a commercial farm, windows at chicken height from day old, and they could see out. And the results were extraordinary. We saw changes in their brain, we saw more cognitive flexibility, we saw greater stress resilience, greater leg health, more dust bathing, more activity. amazing impacts for welfare. I measured growth and they grew slower. And I'm so mad at myself because I had this amazing opportunity to capture some of these real positive benefits we get when we improve animal welfare that's outside of the animal's benefit. And I sort of brought this study back down to the rhetoric of animal welfare costs more. So, but if we look at it from a systems perspective and we measure the right things like stress or cortisol or chickens, corticosterone, interacts with the immune system. Stressed animals are sick. Sick animals get antibiotics. Antibiotic use leads to antibiotic resistance. Good welfare interacts with stock people. It's actually bi-directional, but there are implications for the people who work with animals in terms of mental health and empathy, and that's a community benefit. And we can look at things like wasting resources, and so it's less environmentally sustainable to have poor welfare. We're feeding animals that are sick or sunk costs before they get to slaughter, or they're panicking and they're breaking wings and bruising meat. Eggshells are weaker. So we have all of these things, and we now know that animal welfare is critical for sustainable livestock systems. And I got to say, I got it wrong here. I think it improved animal welfare, but if I'd measured the right things, even the stock people said to me, I love working in that shed. Why didn't I quantify that? Because we need to be looking at this holistically if we are going to provide food to people in a way that is sustainable and ethical.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Peta. We have less than 1 minute left, but I promised Marissa I would let her throw to Moth Tracker if you would like to quickly share this one quick call to action with everyone.
One very quick call to action, and that is that the endangered bogong moth is travelling now, and people can help in their own lives, whether it's at home or walking to school or work. So the endangered bogong moth migrates across Australia up to the alpine zone. They're a key food source for the mountain pygmy possums, so both important for the moths themselves and the mountain pygmy possums, but there's so much we don't know about them. And so at Zoos Victoria, we have a citizen science website called Moth Tracker, where we encourage everyone to keep an eye out for bogong moths. They're about the size of the tip of your thumb. They're quite small. You could find them just in your own life. And if you think you've seen a bogong moth, take a photo, upload it to the website. Even if you're not sure, we will verify it for you and pop it on our interactive map. You can even check back later and see if it was a bogong moth. What you do in your own backyard and how you help us to track moths can actually change their future and the future of animals all those ways away up in the Alps, like the pygmy possums. So please do join us in Moth Tracker to help us help them.
Thank you.
How was that for 1 minute?
That was perfect. And I know it sounds, most people probably thinking of the great big giant moths. Bogongs are actually, they're only about this big. And I saw my first one in a nature strip just outside of Royal Park, and I haven't stopped seeing them now. Every time I open the hammock, sorry? Are they white? No, they're brown, and they have on each wing 2 little dark black spots. They just look very nondescript little brown moths. But yes, once you see them, you won't stop seeing them, and you'll keep sending them to Marissa and Zoo Tracker.
And if you'd like to know what they look like, jump on our Moth Tracker website. There are heaps of photos there and IDs for you. They're a great little animal, really important, and it's a way we can all help our beautiful wildlife just by keeping an eye out for our beautiful little moths.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kylie.
If I can just ask you all to bring our hands together and thank our panel. I absolutely feel enriched by the discussion with this group of animals. But now we're going to give you an opportunity to ask any burning questions. I'm sure there are a few. I already am seeing hands, which does not surprise me. We have some roving mics. I have one down the front. She was so fast in getting her hand up. It would be a shame for her not to be first. And I will ask if you ensure that your question is a question, so that goes up at the end. Otherwise, I will ask you to rephrase it. I am much meaner than I look.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So there's a common saying that animal health is for human health, or promoting animal health for human health. So I also agree with Dr. Marissa and also all the speakers that mentions feeding animals as individuals, like making the windows for the chicken. That's really meaningful. So yeah, and I also observe, as I also vet in my home country, but I just wondering, like, how do we should still hold with this saying? Like, should we keep thinking animal health for human health? And because sometimes we are forced to make a difficult choice, like between animal or human, what we should save first. So something like that, it still also make me sad to choose between of them, because like my friends in the remote area, they still also sometimes eat the dogs because there's no protein left. So it's really hard for me to to balance between, to think about this when we are talking about this. Thank you.
Does anyone want to take that question?
I'm happy to.
Cam.
So that brings to mind for me an example of rabies, where there is that real balance of animal health and human health. Rabies is often put out as a big threat to human health, which it is. There's still, unfortunately, a lot of people who die as a result of rabies because, of course, once you're bitten, if you don't receive treatment immediately, it will inevitably lead to death, and that's the same in animals. Some really important research has been done, however, in One Health and thinking about particularly the cost effectiveness, because often this is where it comes into it. There may be limited funding for both. And so if we're limited, we may have to choose between one or the other. Sometimes it is just a thing where we put human health above animal health, but sometimes it is a monetary thing as well. And this is where the research has been really beneficial, because they found that in places like India, where there are a number of free-roaming dogs and where rabies can spread quite quickly, that they were spending a lot of money on treating people who were bitten by dogs. Every time somebody's bitten, if they don't immediately receive post-exposure prophylaxis, so basically a vaccination that they're given straight away, that will spread up their arm or leg into their brain, and that person will die. That's very costly to give to a person. By contrast, vaccinating a dog so that it doesn't become infected is quite cheap. But because there are so many dogs, it can cost quite a bit to vaccinate all of the dogs in an area to the degree where you stop the spread of rabies. So what they looked at was to see is there a certain threshold we can reach where we can stop the spread, and how does that compare to the cost, that ongoing cost that we will have if we don't vaccinate the dogs, where we're having to treat people regularly. And what they found was that within 6 years, it was more cost effective to vaccinate the dogs and stop that spread of rabies both within the dog population and to people than it was just to carry on without any vaccination of dogs and to keep treating people. So in these sorts of cases, we can see that we can actually benefit both animal and human health, and it's more cost effective for everyone. So there are definitely some cases where we do put human health above animal health, but there is some really exciting One Health research out there that's showing that we can do it in a really efficient and cost-effective way that benefits everybody, which is terrific.
Beautiful. I think we have a question from online coming through.
Yes, we do. Thanks. It's come through from Angela, and she's asking, do Australian zoos offer suitable conditions for non-native species, or should conservation focus on sanctuaries in native habitats?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question. It's one that we talk about a lot, obviously. So we have our focus that I've talked about today on our native species, but we also work very closely with international species. And at Zoos Victoria and across the different zoos in Australia through the Zoo and Aquarium Association, we have species selection tools. And we use those to ensure that all of the species in our care have appropriate welfare, have appropriate enclosures, but also have a conservation value. So, for example, animals that are in our zoos are helping to raise awareness or raise funds or help the animals that are back out in their native habitats. So snow leopards at Melbourne Zoo, for example, we're part of a global breeding program for snow leopards. But we also support community conservation and snow leopard conservation in Mongolia and Nepal and Pakistan. And so any of those animals that we have in our zoos have that connection out to the wild, and we make sure that they're important for breeding for release or for research to increase their conservation and welfare, or to increase that advocacy and that investment that we're able to send out to the species back in their natural environments. And so I think there are many different ways you can look at the species that we care for, but we make sure that all of them have that appropriate welfare, the enrichment, the naturalistic enclosures, but they all have that value so that they are helping conservation, they are helping advocacy, and they are helping the animals back out in the wild. Hopefully that answers that. Okay.
Quite a detailed decision-making process now.
Very much so. And there are some species that we would never have in captivity. So, for example, the southern bent-winged bat is one of the animals on our fighting extinction list. They wouldn't do well in captivity, and so we don't have them in a captive breeding program. All of our work is with them out in the wild, whereas there are other animals that do well, and that can raise that investment and that awareness and that focus for their wild cousins.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
Well, thank you everyone for this presentation. I wanted to know, in talking about animal welfare and well-being, how do you as scientists choose initiatives without, and I'm going to fumble over this word, you know the word,
yes.
Anthropomorphizing, yeah, the animal. Like, how did you come up with the idea that a chicken needs light to look up without perhaps saying, well, as a person we would like to have light? You know, how do you make that decision?
Peta.
Such a great question. And it's so important. I've got lots of things happening right here. With the windows, there's movement in Europe about putting windows in barns, not at chicken height though, higher. We were trying to see if we could get them to get used to the range, so when they open the doors they'd use it quicker because they have a short life and a short period of time when they're kept in free range systems. But also you know your animal. Like, so much of the brain is about visual processing for a chicken. They're tetrachromatic, so they have those 4 cones. So like us, red, red, blue, green, and UV. So we can't see the world like the animals, but we try and understand, I would expect, their physiology or their behaviour, and sometimes it's natural. I think we need to sometimes be careful about, we want to give them everything natural because a fox chasing you is pretty natural, but probably not something we want to give that anti-predator response. But the ideas, people are so creative. People come from areas of empathy, different spaces, different experiences, and then using the right methodology to test and listen to the animal, I think is critical. Because even if the idea maybe was anthropomorphic, if we can see that it's important to the animal, then we've got that information. Because I see too many times, not only we make decisions about animals that are anthropomorphic, and at best it's wasting people's time and energy and money, and at its worst, there can be some serious outcomes for the animals as well. So I think it's a great question. I do like a little bit of anthropomorphism because I think it's empathy and we like to, but then that rigorous science and assessing it, I think is critical.
Yeah, that's really, in nature conservation, some work we've done recently is working with architecture and design. So they build houses for people, right? They understand what people want and what they need and what kind of nice place they would live. So we've started working with them to design artificial houses for animals. So rather than us just building a box and cutting a hole in it or making it bigger, they think about, well, what capabilities does this animal need to live out its lives? How important is play and forming relationships and being able to see the sky? And so bringing that design thinking into ecology is a great way to do that, right? To think through the eyes of an animal, but then to really try and test it and put some numbers around it so that we can actually make sure that we're not just making ourselves feel better in the anthropomorphizing, but we're actually improving the life of another species. So there's a lot of fun stuff coming on the horizon, I think.
I could probably jump in with a zoo example there as well. So all of the animals that we care for at Zoos Victoria have an enrichment program, and that's based on the species. It might be food-based, non-food-based, social. So something like a Tasmanian devil, we work a lot with the devils out in the wild, so we know those different behaviours and social structures, the way they work and eat food, the different foraging, the different scents. And so we can see what they do in the wild and, to an extent, try and replicate that so that they're using their brains and they're using their bodies. They're thriving, not just surviving. And that then also means that they're getting those skills that means when we release them out to the wild. So last year we released devils out to disease-free Maria Island in Tasmania. And those devils were wonderful. I went and got to trap and survey them earlier this year, and all of them were looking absolutely fantastic, the 4 of them we released, and then they also had youngsters later in the year. So being able to give them enrichment, those naturalistic behaviours, to move them, to get them to think, to have that enrichment for them is really important. But knowing how they move and think and work out in the wild through observations, through research, and being able to then try and replicate that as best we can, I think is really important too, so that what the species gets is what the species needs, and what you do for a devil is different to what you do for a little pukila mouse, which is different to a plains wanderer, which is different to a spotted tree frog. And so it's really knowing the species and getting to work with them in the wild and with the animals in our care to give them the best life possible.
Can I add something that I was just thinking about, because I'm trying to think of like a broiler in the wild. And so it is tricky because animals look so different in different environments. In animal welfare science, we have choice experiments. What do you prefer? We ask the animals to choose. They don't always make the right choice that's going to be good for health. Eat Mars bars all day is probably not going to result. So we need to put it into context, as we were saying before, and weigh up some of these things, and there's trade-offs. But not only do we can assess what's important to them, we also have these motivation tests. So it's almost an economic model, and we ask the animals to pay for access to a resource. So we know that nest boxes are really important for laying hens because they will pay just before oviposition. They will pay extraordinary amounts of work to gain access to that. So then we're also saying that is such a strong motivation. We can assess if they don't have access to it, if they're stressed, if biological functioning is disrupted. But if that's not happening, but they're willing to pay a lot, it's important to them.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I might even jump in as well, if that's all right. I spoke before about the differences between dingoes and dogs. And so the transition there was that the same autonomy that dingoes enjoyed of going back to a wild existence and having their own lives was then transferred to dogs. And so we can, in some instances, continue to respect that autonomy without necessarily anthropomorphizing them. And so dogs in these remote communities can travel, they'll go to the shops and they'll see if they can find some food there. They'll hop in the back of a car and travel to another community if they want, not necessarily with their owners. They have their own lives, and so they're given a lot of free will, which is sometimes can get them in trouble, but it's always a beautiful thing to see.
Choice and agency is so important for animals.
Yeah.
And I think what's exciting for me working in poultry science is typically the flocks have been, 45,000 birds are treated as a whole, but they're individual animals. And so creating choice for those animals and autonomy and agency is so important because, there are species differences, but as you said, there are absolutely individual differences. If we're going to provide for all of their needs, allow them some agency.
I'm going to interject before we have our own conversation.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yes, down the front here.
Thank you. Just more of a comment to Peta than anything else. I've been making a point for years of buying free-range eggs. And I was appalled earlier this year when on the packet I saw 10,000 birds per hectare. And do a little bit of calculation there. That's 1 square metre per chicken, which appalls me.
I'm going to rephrase that as a question.
Yeah. Yes. You know, my PhD was in free range. I love the idea of these trade-offs between free-roaming dogs and confined dogs with perhaps more safety. It's so similar to chickens when we talk about that. For me, the free range is so interesting, and let's catch up for hours after this because I'd love to chat about it. There's been so much focus on space, and we know space is important and we can assess that. For me, chickens are descendants from jungle fowl. So giving them heaps of space that is barren or has grass, they're not ruminants, is not an environment that is meeting what we know that they would like out in there. So I would rather see a smaller space with more complexity to it. The shade, the scratching, some great work from the Animal Welfare Science Centre, Hannah Larson did, saying actually micro environments on the range are critical because birds will want to do this at this certain time of day and rest and sit under sun. They will want to scratch and forage and they'll dust bathe at other times. And so their needs shift. And so I take your point and I love that passion behind it because we should be asking what matters. But when it comes to space, I think sometimes the quantity and the quality aren't always addressed, or certainly the focus is more on the quantity.
Yeah, that I'd never considered it that way before, but that's potentially to the anthropomorphising question, that the open space is something that makes us feel good and it's not necessarily aligned with, you know, the
it's a grass and it's green and
yeah,
it's
it makes me happy.
But laying
what's the chicken's problem?
Eat too much grass and they die of grass infection. It's not perfect. Some people do it fantastically.
Yeah.
But exactly. What we think and what the animal is telling us is different sometimes.
We have another question from online.
Yeah, we've got lots of questions online. We've had a couple of questions that are similar, basically asking how do we reconcile human needs for housing, agriculture, industry with preserving wildlife habitats and environmental conservation. Thoughts?
Yep, look at me. Yes, I think it is critical. And I think it sort of goes back to our first person's question as well. How do we decide some of these hard decisions about food security, and that depends on where you are in the world and the impacts. I think, first of all, we need to stop looking at them competingly, and we need to maybe rephrase how we think about animal welfare and animal production. And have we got it right in the past? No, there are consequences, and focusing on yield, whether that's crops or animals, doesn't do good things for the animals, for the people, or for the environment. And so if I could recommend, we can share some links or email me, two really critical papers I think that have come out about animal welfare and how that sits in terms of food security, producing food in a changing climate, and biodiversity and animal welfare, is looking at animal welfare as core of how we produce food. And that may mean that we don't get as much yield in such shorter time, but maybe we see these offsets. So as I said before, antibiotic resistance and some of these other sorts of things. But also there's such clever people out there. I mean, our faculty and our school is an eclectic bunch of people who come from different spaces and different passions, and things like putting in, corridor habitats have impacts for soil health and increase lamb survival. And so I think we've got to stop thinking about it as an either or, and the science should be pushing us forward to how do we create food and people and interactions with animals, not as if we are separate, because it is all connected, as Cam has been saying.
I mean, I would add from a wildlife conservation perspective, something that we often do, particularly with urban environments, is we'll pit it up as a fight, right? And the story you will see is meet the grassland dragon that's standing in the way of 10,000 new homes. Or here's the orchid that's stopping this, development that could ease the pressure on first home buyers. We continue to allow ourselves to be presented with this choice: is you can have enough homes for people to live, or you can keep your precious native species. And when you give people a choice like that, they will almost always go, well, okay, I'm sorry about that dragon with no ears, or whatever you've called it, but I think that all these people should have somewhere to live. And it's absolutely a false dichotomy. We can have urban landscapes that are shared with native species. We can have agricultural lands that are biodiversity friendly, and that also improves our yield. This is not to be a sort of carte blanche that instead of having some habitats preserved, we just turn everything into agriculture and urban. But we need to move away from this idea that nature is separate and it is out there, and you have to pick between a landscape functioning for one or the other, because there's so much benefits in when we have both of those in the same space.
I absolutely agree. And what you often find is that whole areas have been destroyed. So Victoria has destroyed 99.5% or more of our native grasslands. It's our most endangered ecosystem. But we still have a number of critically endangered species out there that are living alongside us. So the Victorian grassland eelis dragon and the plains wanderer are actually found on sheep stations. And the people there have cared for that land, and the sheep have grazed down that land in an appropriate way that actually supports those endangered species. So you can have both. You've got the agriculture and the sheep. You've got those endangered species living alongside them. So often it's not an either or, it's how do we work together to be as sustainable as possible. It's similar to what happens overseas as well. Palm oil is often discussed. It is a massive global item that is used in so many things. And palm oil is not evil. In fact, it has a much higher yield than any other oils, so you need less space to produce more of it. It's just how it's produced. The cheapest way to do it is to cut down rainforest areas that's needed by orangutans and sun bears and Sumatran rhinos, and then burn it and move on. But what you could do is actually take those areas that are already degraded and replenish them and make sure you've got the right kind of growing medium and actually just reuse them over and over again. So you can have sustainable palm oil. So you have your native rainforest that's protected for your wildlife, and you have communities and groups that are still creating that palm oil on land that has already been used and can be reused again. So I think often it's about looking at how can we sustain what we need while protecting that virgin rainforest, that habitat the animals need, and do it in a way that's sustainable into the future, because we shouldn't be pitting one against the other. We should be looking for those solutions where both wins.
I'm going to slightly challenge something that Peta said. And you said that we haven't always got it right in the past. I'm going to say, whose past? Because in terms of sustainability, Indigenous people the world over have really led the way for thousands and thousands of years. And in terms of sustainability, not just of the environment, but of the animals that live there, practices like traditional cool burning in Australia have been hugely important, not just in terms of avoiding catastrophic bushfires that damage everything, irreparably kill people, kill animals, but it's also crucial in the maintenance of the environment. So we're now, and it's not just something of the past either, it's something that we're seeing right now, where there is traditional cool burning returning to certain areas, where we're seeing species of plants that were thought to be extinct are actually, they were dormant, but they needed this cool burning to reappear. And through those cool burning practices, Indigenous people stimulate the environment to regrow. There's new shoots of plants, which brings in animals and sustains them as well. And through that, that's providing food for people, food for animals, and continuing caring for this country and really working with it, with what it needs, rather than trying to exert our dominance upon it and shape it into what we think works.
Yeah, we really did a number on things when colonisation was no fun for anything. Who else has a question? There were lots of hands before. I might take one from the room.
Thank you. As a suburban gardener, I find it very hard to maintain a happy relationship with brush-tailed possums. Is there any thought about introducing a program of immunocastration?
I mean, it's not a thought that I've ever had.
I can probably talk to that one a little bit. I mean, how lucky are you to have beautiful native wildlife, I think, but also people, you know, we have wildlife that live alongside us and sometimes they can eat the plants or get into roofs or similar. So I think it's a matter of looking at how can we have what they need and what we need as well. So basic things like being able to provide water for wildlife and the type of plants that they like to live in, those native gardens where they can move around. But there are also plants they particularly like to eat that maybe we don't want them to. And so one of the people here, one of my amazing mentors, Professor Lynn Selwood, who was at the University of Melbourne for decades and has retired recently, but will never truly retire like many of us biologists. She is still doing a lot of work. She actually developed a new possum-safe spray, tested it in her own garden to keep the possums in the plants she wanted them in and not eating things like, you know, the roses or the flowers or vegetables. And it was so successful, it's now being sold through Bunnings. So she patented it and is selling it. And so that's where you have someone, an amazing wildlife biologist, looking at these different techniques to live alongside the possums. And you can buy I can't think of the name of it, Lynn would be horrified with me, but you can actually buy those things to keep the possums off particular things you want. In terms of immunocontraception, Lynn also looked at that with her lab group, and I was one of the members of her lab group working alongside these people and looking at what are some different ways that wildlife can be controlled in certain areas in a welfare positive or welfare neutral way, so you're not hurting the animals. This wasn't thought about really for Australia, but for New Zealand, where brush-tailed possums are a major issue. They're a conservation issue as an introduced species. And so there was work done there and some really interesting work looking at how do you modify the zona pellucida of oocytes, so reproductive work that means that the possums just aren't breeding as much. There was some great work done there, some good steps forward, but it's not something that you would ever want to come back to Australia because it could affect so many different species. And so there has been work, they've looked at it, there are considerations of how would you use it elsewhere, but for somewhere like Australia, I don't think we would use that on our native species. I think the best thing we can do is provide natural habitats to protect them, to learn to live alongside them, and to use those wildlife-friendly type sprays to keep them off those plants we particularly love.
You're going to kick yourself, Marissa. I'm pretty sure it's called possum off.
Yeah, it probably is. It probably is.
So, and I have poss off, yes. I have used it to keep them off my budding grapevine, which is the only thing that gave our house any shade in the summer. But yes, it is a remarkable invention. We probably have time for one more question. Is there one online that needs to be jumped on?
We've got stacks, unfortunately.
Stacks.
I'm not going to get through them all. I'm going to bundle two again. They're sort of related. One is training animals for entertainment still ethically or scientifically supported, particularly in zoos? And how important is tourism, for example in zoos, in educating the community about animal welfare and conservation?
So I can probably start on that. I think that was a bit of a two-parter, so remind me if I get areas wrong. We don't train animals for entertainment. In fact, we have a very focused area of choice and control, as Peta was talking about, where we're very hands-off. We don't train animals for particular tricks or similar, and it's about the animal's choice in being able to do what they would like to do. So things like even giving injections, we've trained animals to come and have a treat to get their injection for a vaccination or a blood draw. Some animals, we do have the free flight show at Healesville Sanctuary. That's so the birds can actually fly and express those those natural behaviours, but they don't have to do it if they don't want to. So I think training animals for entertainment, it's certainly not something that we do, and I think there is a lot of change across the world in not doing that kind of thing, giving the animals that choice and autonomy, and being able to connect with them, to see them, to enjoy learning about them in a different way. What was the second part of the question? Sorry, I know that was the first.
About the importance of tourism.
Tourism, thank you.
Spreading the message.
Tourism is extremely important. So local tourists coming and visiting us, international tourists as well, because you need to be able to connect with these species, to understand them, and then be able to take actions that you can do in your own life. And so we're able to teach people what they can do, things like using moth tracker or having sustainable palm oil. We have a Don't Palm Us Off campaign where you can learn more about that. So you're able to reach people and have those more wildlife-friendly behaviours. And I think that's really important. There are a number of programs through zoos about illegal wildlife trade and trafficking and teaching people not to do those kind of things, about not having the kind of interactions you see overseas with have a photo with a tiger, for example. So we actually have a big program, a social science program, about how dangerous it is for people to have selfies with animals. And we have a set of photo rules where we never post selfies with animals. We just don't take them. If we're working with an animal, releasing it or similar, then we can certainly share that and show the work we're doing and connect people with the conservation work, but we're just not going to be doing the kind of pictures that you see overseas where you're forcing an animal into a situation it doesn't want to be in. So I think it's really important when we think about that, don't take selfies with wildlife, enjoy them where they are, give them that choice, and teach others around you. I think tourism's so important to raise funds, but also to share those messages that we can do better and we can really protect our wildlife.
I saw the show at Healesville recently and the bird was invited to have its nails done. And if it didn't want to, it's just like, no. And then they're like, you're going to do it? And they're like, yeah, okay, fine, you can do my nails. And then, so there's this amazing consent that's being trained now as well. We just have 1 minute left, so if you have a very quick response.
I wanted to add something very strange that we did with chickens, which was there is a drug that is used globally with alcoholics to block the reward cycle called nalmefene. We wanted to find out what was rewarding to chickens and we blocked their opioid receptors and we couldn't train them. Those clicker trainings, they just wouldn't participate. Still ate, different than hunger, that reward, that pleasure. So sometimes with some animals, actually those interactions can be so enriching and so rewarding.
There you go.
Train your chickens.
We are going to have to leave it there.